Hi there, it is Phil, and we are getting ready to do Article 517, Healthcare Facilities. Ooh, this is a brutal one. So, things that you need to know. When we're dealing with hospitals, we're dealing with people who are non-ambulatory, and what that means is you got people who cannot take care of themselves, right? They're unconscious, they're infirm for whatever reason. So, there's a lot of rules about that because in an emergency, well, we don't want an emergency pretty much happening in hospitals. So they do a lot of different things to make sure that we don't have emergencies or that they're easily handled in a hospital. In the beginning, it talks about alternative power sources. Typically, when you get into a hospital situation, there are multiple power sources. In addition to PG&E power, many times they require multiple grids. So in other words, I don't know if you've ever seen a power shortage where a part of the city goes out and the other parts of the city don't. That's because different grids are set up differently. So a hospital is required to have a connection at two grids, so in case they lose one, they still have the other. In case that fails, then they're going to have generator backup, which we're going to get to here in a bit. Now, there are different branches of the electrical system. There's the equipment branch, and the equipment branch is the one that takes care of the air conditioning systems, that sort of thing. You've got the life safety branch, which is a system of feeders and branch circuits supplying power for lighting receptacles that is automatically connected. Then you have the critical branch, and the critical branch is the one that's connected to the operating rooms and all of the areas where people are going to be on life support. So very, very important that they get and maintain power all the time. So there's other things that we have to concern ourselves with in the hospital areas. Anesthesia, ether, and other anesthetics can be extremely volatile, very, very flammable. So in those areas, they're considered classified hazardous areas, Class 1, Division 1 in many cases. The other problem that you run into in hospitals is you've got people who have got needles and stuff stuck underneath their skin. And when we were at the beginning of the class, we talked about, okay, how can people get a fatal electric shock? And remembering that when you're dry skin is a really good insulator. When you've got a piece of metal stuck underneath your skin, so it's stuck into basically the bag of salt water that you are, suddenly you are highly, highly susceptible. Especially if somebody's got something stuck down into their heart or something like that, a tiniest amount of current can kill them. Okay, so there's a lot of things that they do to try to prevent that. Many times now, they're not even leaving metal needles in. They pierce with a metal needle and then they put a plastic needle in so that there's no conductivity there. But they're even concerned about grounded surfaces, things like metal countertops and things like that. All of this stuff has to be bonded together and grounded. They also talk about a bunch of different grounding grids and stuff like that. So remembering that a hospital is for people, right? We're not talking about veterinary hospitals here. We're talking about people hospitals. We're talking about dental, psychiatric, nursing, obstetrician, surgical cares. These are all different types of buildings that are going to be covered in various portions of this section, which again, as I said before, is a very intensive section. I'm just kind of bouncing around on these definitions here. So you've got limited care facilities, which is 4 or more persons who are incapable of self-preservation. So this is another area. When you've got people who are not capable of self-preservation, there are going to be more rules around them about power and so forth like that, maintaining the power so that they can continue their machines that are preserving their lives, breathing machines, heart-lung machines, that sort of thing. Okay? So they also get very specific about patient care spaces and patient bed locations. And one of the reasons for that is in a patient care or patient bed location, there's a chance that you're going to need to have all sorts of different electrical appliances plugged in. And so there's specific rules on how many outlets that you've got and then where those outlets are being fed from. Are they coming from the life safety branch, the critical care branch? There's specific rules about that as well. So I'm over on to page 420 now. Let's see. There we go. You see me? Okay, great. Where it talks about basic care category 3 spaces, a space in which failure of equipment or a system is not likely to cause injury to patients, staff, or visitors that can cause patient discomfort. Okay, so maybe the vacuum pump from at your dentist's office goes off, that sort of thing. It's an inconvenience, it's not a hazard. General care category 2 is a space in which failure of equipment or a system is likely to cause minor injury to patients, staff, or visitors. And then you've got critical care, which is the failure of equipment or system is likely to cause major injury or death. So they've got these levels, these hierarchy of needs, again, making sure that when you're into a critical care area, that there's a much higher likelihood that electrical power is going to be maintained, okay? Patient equipment grounding point, it's not always required, but in some situations, or in some locations I should say, what they will have is they'll have everything grounded together and everything is bonded together, and you're going to see in other places that they want grounding and bonding. They take it, they're very meticulous about that. They don't want any stray currents going anywhere. They want everything grounded at the same equal potential so that there's no difference in potential, right? No voltage, in other words. So they get into part 2, wiring protection. Again, I'm just really skimming over this because there's just so much. Another thing that I should mention, the book that we're working off of, the National Electric Code Book, is different than the California Electric Code Book. The California Electric Code Book goes much more in depth and has a lot of different requirements than what this code book has. The state of California has increased in a lot of different areas, and so if you're interested in that, you can look at the state of California book. If you ever happen to work in a hospital, hospitals are not inspected by the jurisdiction that they reside in. They are inspected by OSHPD, which is the Occupational Safety and Health something. I forget what the acronym is, but these are specialized inspectors who have taken training and are at a much higher level than normal inspectors, and they also specialize in things like hospitals and schools. Those are the areas where they are required to be employed to build these projects. So the normal inspector isn't really involved. Now, if you get into medical offices or something like that, as an example, when I was a building inspector, they rebuilt Eden Hospital. The hospital itself was all OSHPD inspectors, so I wasn't involved. However, they built a giant 10-story, I forget how many stories, medical office building right next to it, and that was all inspected by the county, me. And it was just because of the level of care and the procedures that were performed there were different than in a hospital. They didn't have the invasive procedures and that sort of thing, okay? So things that we're not worried about, business offices, corridors, waiting rooms, in clinics, medical offices, that sort of thing. We're more concerned about patient care areas. That's our primary concern in this section. Okay, one of the things that you are required to have when wiring in a hospital or medical office is all branch circuits. I'm looking at 517.13a here. All branch circuits serving patient care spaces shall be provided with an effective ground fault current path by installation in a metal raceway system or cable having metallic armor or sheath assembly. The metal raceway system, metallic cable armor or sheath assembly shall itself qualify as an equipment grounding conductor. So an MC cable has a black, a white, and a green, right? But also that outside metal sheath is also a grounding path, so it's a redundant grounding path, and that is what is required here. They want to have a redundant grounding path so that grounding is going to get taken care of one way or another. If you have one method of grounding that fails, the other one is going to take care of it. So it's and that's what you can expect to see in all of these things. There is AC cable is another one that they use a lot of in hospitals, and it's green colored. And again, this is an AC cable that actually has a grounding conductor on the inside, in addition to that that outside sheath that's an additional grounding path. They talk about making sure that you've got insulated grounding conductors to all the receptacles. You don't see a lot of isolated ground receptacles, especially not in patient care areas. We really, really don't want to see that at all, because again, it's all about making sure that all of the grounds are interconnected together. Now, you can have an isolated ground outside of the patient care area, and that's fine, but in the patient care area, no isolated grounds at all. 517.14, it talks about panel board bonding, and that's actually what they're saying there is they have an additional bonding conductor that goes from panel to panel, minimum size of number 4, and all it's there to do is to connect and make sure that all of the subpanels are all bonded together, again, eliminating the potential of any current flowing through grounded surfaces, right? Ground fault protection. Now, as we know, ground fault protection doesn't just happen at the receptacle level, right? We have ground fault protection that happens in our services. We can also have our subfeeders ground fault protected. Now, here's the thing. You get a ground fault, you need to make sure that you've got selectivity. What does that mean? If we have a ground fault in our room, we don't want the main ground fault for the whole building to shut the whole building off. That would be bad, right? So we can have localized ground fault protection in the branch circuit. We can have the feeder protected by ground fault protection, and then we can have the service protected by ground fault. When you've got selectivity, what's going to happen is the ground fault that's closest to the ground fault is going to be tripped first. It's not going to take out the main system, it's going to take out a small segment instead of a large segment. Because again, the goal here is to make sure that our critically damaged people are protected and still have power, right? In 517.18, it talks about patient bed locations and the receptacles and the numbers of receptacles that need to be there. And it talks about where those receptacles are being powered from, whether they're coming from the general power, the critical care power, and so forth. And it lays out specifics on how many outlets that you need to have at a patient bed location. It's interesting if you have been to well, maybe you haven't been there recently, but somewhat recently, if you've been to a hospital, you'll notice that a lot of the critical care equipment that they have is also battery powered, so that they can unplug it from the wall and they can have a person on a gurney going down the hallway with all this equipment dragging behind them still operating, because it's all battery backup. So basically, all the power to these pieces of equipment are just going to a battery charger, so that it makes it safer, and it makes, in case of a power outage, you still have got equipment that's going to run for however long of a time. And they go through patient bed receptacles in the critical care area, operating room receptacles, and so forth, and you guys can read up on that. When you get into 517.19e, it talks about equipment grounding and bonding. And one of the critical things here is your plain old normal everyday MC connector is probably not going to fly. They want bonding lock nuts, so you're going to have connectors that are listed for bonding and grounding. So those aren't just going to be your run-of-the-mill ones, and it's very important that those get done. If you don't, the other option is to having bonding bushings on every one of those conduit entries, and then a bonding jumper that ties them all together. Again, making sure that everything is at the same ground potential, which is the key. Wet procedure locations. A wet procedure location is just as gross as it sounds. Where you've got, maybe it's washing, maybe they're getting in there, maybe there's a lot of blood or feces, or I don't even want to think about it. But what they're trying to install there and what they require is they have to be provided with special protection against electrical shock by one of the following means: a power distribution system that inherently limits the possibility of ground fault due to first fault to a low volume without interrupting the power supply, or a power distribution system in which the power supply is interrupted if the ground fault current does in fact exceed a value of 6 milliamps. So you're still, it's different from the normal ground fault protection that we normally have. So in case I haven't mentioned it already, hospitals, the people who design this stuff, that's what they do. They pretty much do hospitals because it is a very unique and challenging place to design stuff. So part 3, the essential electrical system for these facilities shall comprise a system capable of supplying a limited amount of lighting and power surface, which is considered essential for life safety and orderly cessation of procedures during the time normal electrical service is interrupted for any reason. This includes clinics, medical and dental offices, outpatient facilities, nursing homes, limited care facilities, hospitals, and other healthcare facilities. So what does that mean? We need to make sure that we've got emergency lighting. We need to make sure that we've got exit lighting going on. We need to make sure that our alarm systems are still functioning. So there are different ways that we can have those things done. In the hospital, they might just have a lot of battery powered things, lights that have got their own batteries, exit lights that have got their own batteries. There's a lot of different ways that can go through. But again, it's enough to keep the lights on and to be able to work with your patients to either get them stable or get them out of the building, whatever the case may be. Okay. 517.30, sources of power, talks about the different types of power sources and that you're required to have a minimum of 2 independent power sources. So they talk about generating units. They also talk about fuel cell systems. Now, we haven't really talked about fuel cell. A fuel cell is an electronic piece of equipment that converts things like natural gas into electricity, heat, and water, is basically what they do. And the nice thing about them when they're working properly, and the reason I say that is because they're very complex. I got to deal with one, and basically a gentleman was putting it into his house, and it looked like an outdoor refrigerator. And the 2 guys who were installing it, honestly, all they needed was a little hat with a propeller on it. They couldn't be any bigger geeks than you've ever seen in your life, and they were very nice people. But oh my God, they were kind of out there because it's, again, super complex. And myself personally, I wouldn't want to bet my life on it. I prefer generators. You're required to have multiple systems, and there is a very, very short period of time that they will allow the place to be without power. And in many cases, it's no time at all, okay? Which is why, again, a lot of the equipment that they're installing these days has got its own battery backup inside, so that it does, whether the power fluctuates or anything, it really doesn't matter, okay? So, talks about in 517.31, talks about the separate branches and the life safety critical equipment. And we need to make sure, again, that this system is not like a single family residential system at all. This is a very well built system that's based on reliability. It has to have a very, very good record of liability to be allowed in one of these situations, because they really, really don't want to take a chance with human life because of equipment problems. Okay? When you're wiring, when you've got these different systems, you've got the life safety branch, critical branch, essential electrical system, all have to be entirely separate. In other words, they have to have their own raceways, their own cable trays, all separate. So a failure on one or a damage from one cannot affect the other. Okay? Typically, they're all going to be in hard metal raceways. So at minimum, we're looking at EMT conduit for a lot of this type of wiring, which is in Jiminy Christmas, where I'm at, 517 C123, mechanical protection of essential electrical system. only the following wiring methods are permitted: non-flexible metal raceways, MI cable, PVC cased in 2 inches of concrete, listed flexible metal raceways and listed metal sheath cable assemblies with a list of requirements here. So again, it's not your regular wiring system. It's a much more robust wiring system than what you're normally going to see elsewhere. The capacity of the system. The essential electrical system shall have the capacity and rating to meet the maximum actual demand likely produced by the connected load. This is critical. And designing a generator to be able to meet these loads, most of the time, a big hospital such as Eden or Alta Bates or something like that, they've got huge, I mean, when I say huge, I mean huge, bigger than your house, huge generators that can power all the systems in the whole hospital without even breaking a sweat. They're built so that they can handle all the load plus, maybe an additional 50 or even 100%, making sure that that generator is not going to get overloaded. So it goes through the branches requiring automatic connection. Life safety branch is a big one. Eliminated means of egress is another big one. Exit signs. And again, many times these are taken care of by their own internal batteries. Alarm systems, communication systems, generator set accessories. So even when you're not running a generator has systems that are running all the time. For example, they have a water pump and a heater, and so the block cooling system is heated up so that when that generator fires up, it's already warmed up. It has oil systems that operate, and then they've also got very specific rules on how often those generators have to be run to make sure that they're in tip-top shape, because you can't have a generator that the mice have moved into the windings and it won't start. That will not do. So they're very strict about how often you need to get after these generators and make sure that everything's running properly. And it talks about all the different things that need to be run on the generator. Critical branch, task illumination in the critical care areas, patient care species, and then it goes through the whole long list of nurseries and all the different places that it's critical that illumination is on. And it goes through this whole long list of different things here. Now, once the critical branch is taken care of, then you can start thinking about the equipment branch. So in a shutdown, one of the things that you don't want your generator to have to do is to have all the load suddenly shifted onto it. So what they're going to do is they're going to parse it out in segments. So you're going to do the critical branch and the life safety branches first. And then once those are all up and running, then you can start talking about the equipment branch. And the equipment branch is things like the central suction equipment, sump pumps, compressed air, hoods in the kitchen. Maybe they've got a chemistry area there that also requires vacuum hoods so that they don't get contaminants in the area where the workers are at. So it goes through a whole long list of the things that are going to be in order of how they're going to be connected. And then you've got equipment for delayed automatic or manual connection, which is things like heating or something like that, things that are very high draw, but they're also things that we can wait for. Okay. Elevators are another one of those things. Hyperbaric facilities and hypobaric facilities, you know what those are? That's in case you're diving and you get the bends, and they put you in a hyperbaric chamber and they pressurize you up, and then you have to be in a pressurized chamber for literally days while the nitrogen works its way out of your blood. So they also have essential electrical systems for nursing homes and limited care homes, inpatient hospital care facilities, all things that, again, you should be reading up on. And at this point, it starts to repeat a lot in nuanced ways. Again, trying to make sure that our patients have got the electrical power that they need to survive and that they've got electrical power in the area so that they can escape if that is necessary. Part 4, inhalation as anesthetizing locations. So again, some of the anesthetics are extremely volatile, flammable, explosive, that sort of things, and so they're considered Class 1 Division 1 locations. And even the areas where those things are stored are considered Class 1 Division 1 locations. And so the designer needs to be aware of these things so that they can build appropriately. Part 5, X-ray installation. Basically, when you're dealing with X-ray stuff, they're not talking about your safety from the X-rays. That's not what they're talking about at all. They just want to make sure that the X-ray equipment is installed correctly, it's got the proper disconnects, that sort of thing. Part 6, communication signaling systems. When we're talking about Class 2 and Class 3 signaling, those are power limited, and what that means is they've got a little transformer that that lowers the amount of power that goes there, turns them into low voltage, but it also limits the amount of current that flows so that they're safer and you've got a less chance of electrical shock from them. But again, they've got very specific requirements about that stuff as well. Let's see. So I'm just trying to kind of skip over this stuff and just hit the high parts, understanding that most of this stuff is going to take a lot of intensive education to get your head wrapped around this, because this is one of the more difficult chapters in the code book. So that's about as much as I've got. Hope you enjoyed it. Kept it under half an hour, just barely. Whew. And okay, this will come out to you with the quiz for quiz 9, I think I just put out. So you should be getting the quiz answers, and hopefully when you get the quiz answers, you check your work on your quiz and then email me back with your score. And you can look forward to a quiz on this on Thursday or maybe soon. Talk to you soon. See you.